Have you ever considered that what has been preached and taught for centuries might be based on flawed translations? That is precisely what a Bible translator in tears publicly revealed. They have lied to us for 2,000 years. Want to uncover the shocking truth behind this statement? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share today could radically transform your understanding of the Scriptures. For 2 millennia, billions have placed their faith in verses that are supposedly the Word of God. Yet decades of research by some of the greatest experts in ancient languages point to translation errors that affect entire doctrines. Worse still, these inaccuracies are not minor details, but critical points that may have altered the entire course of Christian history. If you believe this issue deserves attention, share this content, give it a like, and subscribe to the Valley of Redemption. By doing so, you help others discover historical truths that can strengthen, rather than destroy, Christian faith. In this video, you will discover how the concept of hell might have been mistranslated, needlessly frightening entire generations. Why one of Christianity's most central doctrines might be founded on a misinterpretation of ancient Hebrew, and how our understanding of the very nature of God may have been shaped by political decisions made during the Middle Ages, rather than the original Bible itself. But first, we need to understand how the Bible journeyed through a labyrinth of translations, cultures, and even political pressures over 2 millennia. If a single mistranslated word can distort the meaning of an entire verse, imagine the impact of centuries of potential misunderstandings. So, if you're ready to confront ideas that could shake the very foundation of your faith, stay with me. Together, let's explore these startling revelations and uncover why a seasoned translator in tears declared that we've been deceived for 2,000 years. Get ready, because what you're about to hear could forever change the way you read the Bible. The translation process, a web of influences. Have you ever stopped to consider that every word you read on the pages of the Bible has passed through a labyrinth of human decisions, often driven by power, convenience, or sheer misunderstanding of the original languages? Most people believe that the Bible they hold in their hands was translated directly from ancient texts into their modern language in a neutral, almost miraculous manner. But the reality is far from that. Every translation is subject to the pressures of religious leaders, cultural concepts that may not exist in other languages, and even political agreements. Imagine, for instance, that a single Hebrew word could have 10 possible translations in English. Which one should be chosen? The answer is not always dictated solely by the word's actual meaning, but often by those who hold the power to decide. If a king or a pope endorsed a particular doctrine, this undoubtedly influenced how that term was translated, and, consequently, how millions of people came to understand that passage. Does this sound exaggerated? Consider this. There are records of translators who were pressured or even persecuted for wanting to remain faithful to the oldest texts. Conversely, there are cases of translators who softened certain passages to avoid conflict with the official doctrine of their time. The result? Errors, or at the very least, subtle distortions that have been perpetuated across multiple versions, reinforcing questionable doctrines and even redefining entire aspects of the Christian faith. In the next few minutes, we will examine 3 specific passages that have been distorted throughout history. These are not insignificant details, but issues that fundamentally alter how we view themes such as eternal condemnation, the very nature of God, and even the essence of sin. If you've ever wondered why certain translations seem so different from others, prepare yourself. Some of these distortions were intentionally made to align the biblical text with the interests of powerful groups. Now think about the cultural complexities involved. How do you translate heaven to a people who do not believe in an afterlife? How do you convey the concept of sin to a society whose moral framework is entirely different from that of the West. Translators must choose terms that make sense to their target audience. But often those terms carry meanings far beyond what the original author intended. It's like trying to describe a color that doesn't exist within another culture's visual spectrum. Inevitably, something is lost in the process, and we cannot ignore the direct influence of religious institutions. At certain points in history, the Church, or various denominations, exercised near absolute control over what could or could not be included in a translation. If a concept threatened an established doctrine, it was softened or rephrased. If an idea seemed too radical, it was conveniently left out. Even small word substitutions could, over time, shape the beliefs of thousands. After all, if the translation is the only way to access the scriptures, it becomes the truth for the reader, regardless of how faithful it is to the original. What is most concerning is that many of these alterations have been perpetuated without question, as new translations were based on older ones, rather than going directly to the earliest manuscripts. The same errors were repeated and reinforced. The result: entire passages gained interpretations that may not reflect what the biblical authors actually intended to convey. The big question remains: how much of these translations has been shaped by political agendas, dominant cultures, or simply by a worldview that diverges from that of the original biblical authors? And more importantly, how does this affect the way you, living in the 21st century, understand messages about salvation, condemnation, morality, and even the identity of God? In the next section, we will open 3 black boxes of biblical translation, 3 passages that have been manipulated, softened, or completely misinterpreted. And when you discover their true meanings, you may find yourself challenged to reconsider many of the truths you once thought were unshakable. So stay tuned. If the idea of uncovering these distortions already makes you uncomfortable, prepare yourself for what's next. After all, the truth can set us free, but it first confronts us, and sometimes forces us to confront centuries of solidified traditions and beliefs. If you're ready to face this, stay with me. Believe me, this is just the beginning of a journey that could revolutionize the way you read and live the Bible. First distortion, the concept of hell, Gehenna. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to discover might completely overturn everything you thought you knew about hell. When we read this term in the Bible, it typically conjures up the image of a place of eternal torment, doesn't it? But what if this entire notion is the result of a massive distortion over the centuries? In the original Hebrew text, the word used was not hell, but Gehinnom, or Gehenna in Greek, a real valley located south of Jerusalem. Historically, this site was notorious for horrifying rituals, such as child sacrifices to the god Molech, until King Josiah repurposed it as a rubbish dump where fires burned continuously. For the Jews in Jesus' time, mentioning Gehenna evoked something tangible: destruction, purification, and waste being incinerated day and night. There were no pitchfork-wielding devils or eternal torture. That imagery came much later. So, how did this drastic shift happen? The answer is simple: through layers upon layers of translations. As the term moved from Hebrew to Greek and then to Latin, Gehenna became infernum, adopting mythological elements from the Greco-Roman underworld. When it reached English, it was translated as hell, a term heavily influenced by Norse mythology, Helheim. Add to this the weight of medieval art and Dante's famous Divine Comedy, and a vision of hell was born that bore little resemblance to the original concept of Gehenna. Why is this so significant? Let's break it down. 1. Distortion of meaning. The practical and tangible message of purification. a burning rubbish heap symbolizing the destruction of what is worthless, was transformed into a metaphor for eternal torment. Something physical and specific became an abstract realm of endless punishment. 2. Tool of control. During the Middle Ages, this terrifying vision of hell became a convenient tool of fear. The church of the time reinforced its authority by claiming it alone held the keys to save souls from such a dreadful fate. 3. Theological shift. By emphasizing punishment over purification and repentance, hell became synonymous with irreversible condemnation. This obscured the message of renewal and hope that Jesus so often preached. Today, the Valley of Hinnom is nothing more than a peaceful park in Jerusalem. Yet, the weight of this misguided translation continues to loom over theology, shaping how we perceive sin, salvation, and even the character of God. After all, did Jesus truly intend to teach about eternal torture, or was he using the image of a burning rubbish heap to illustrate something far more rooted in purification and repentance? This is just the beginning of the shocking revelations about translations that have shaped a boat and in many cases distorted the faith of billions. If a single term, Gehenna, was enough to create an entire belief system around hell, imagine what else might have been altered over the centuries. Stay tuned for the next discoveries. They may challenge everything you understand about biblical truth. Second distortion, the virginity of Mary, Almah. Prepare yourself. We're about to delve into one of the most central tenets of Christianity, the virgin birth of Jesus. The majority of Christians believe that Isaiah 7:14 directly prophesies the Messiah's birth to a virgin. But what happens when we take a closer look at the Hebrew word used in this verse? In the original text, the term describing the mother of this child is Almah. Hebrew scholars point out that Almah means young woman or maiden of marriageable age, without necessarily implying that she had never had sexual relations. If the author had wanted to emphasize strict virginity, the more appropriate term would have been Betzelem, which specifically carries the idea of sexual purity. However, when the Bible was translated into Greek, in the Septuagint, around the 3rd century BCE, the translators chose a word that changed everything: Parthenos, commonly translated as virgin. This seemingly simple translation step had enormous consequences over the centuries. Why? Because as this notion of virginity entered early Christian communities, it became increasingly central to affirming the divinity of Jesus. Over time, Latin texts such as the Vulgate and later English translations continued this tradition, using terms like Virgo or Virgin. The result? An entire doctrine about the virgin birth of Jesus, which gained prominence not only in the Gospels, but also in broader Christian theology and devotion. To complicate matters further, the historical context of Isaiah 7:14 most likely refers to an event during the reign of King Ahaz in the 8th century BCE. The prophet Isaiah was announcing a sign from God for that era. In other words, he was speaking about a young woman, possibly known to both the king and Isaiah, who would bear a child. And this birth would symbolize God's presence amidst the political and military crisis facing Judah. It was not initially a prophecy about a distant future event, but an immediate assurance of God's control. Over the centuries, however, this prophecy was removed from its original context and repurposed as biblical evidence for a miraculous birth. This linguistic slip not only helped solidify the doctrine of Jesus' virgin birth, but also contributed to even broader beliefs, such as the perpetual virginity of Mary, which became a dogma in various branches of Christianity. From there, the image of the Virgin Mary grew to hold incredible power and influence in art, culture, and religious observance. Now, it's worth reflecting. Does this discovery diminish the significance of Jesus or call Christian faith into question? Not necessarily. Many scholars argue that a sound understanding of biblical languages does not negate belief in miracles. On the contrary, it highlights how crucial it is to understand the Bible in its original context so that we don't assign meanings the biblical authors may never have intended. Faith need not rest on infallible literal translations, but rather on an honest pursuit of divine truth that transcends time. This brings us to an even deeper question. How many other seemingly clear texts might hold vastly different meanings when we rewind the clock and analyze the words in their original Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek? If a single expression like Almah could transform how millions view Mary, and by extension, the story of Jesus, what other surprises might be hidden in the pages of Scripture? The truth is that translating the Bible isn't like solving a simple puzzle. It's more like trying to capture an entire universe of meanings across different cultures and languages. While Christian faith doesn't hinge solely on the precision of each translation, these linguistic nuances can significantly alter how we understand key passages. So prepare to bring this investigative spirit to another highly controversial text. In the image of God. This phrase, after all, shapes how we understand our identity and our relationship with the Creator. What happens when we discover that this oft-repeated phrase might not mean exactly what we think? If this second distortion has already shaken your convictions, wait until you see what comes next. The journey of discovery is far from over, and with each step, it becomes clearer just how much a mistranslated word or nuance can shape centuries of misinterpretation. Third distortion, the image of God, Betzelem Elohim. When you read in Genesis that humanity was created in the image of God, it's easy to interpret it as something abstract or poetically beautiful, isn't it? But what this phrase meant to the cultures of the time when it was written might surprise you profoundly. In the ancient Near East, the image of the gods wasn't a title that applied to everyone. In fact, it was reserved almost exclusively for royalty. Egyptian pharaohs, Babylonian kings, and other monarchs were viewed as living representations of the divine, endowed with the right to rule through this special mark. It was a powerful political tool. If the king was the living image of a god, who would dare challenge his authority? Now imagine the bombshell impact of Genesis 1:27, which declares that everyone was created in the image of God. Every man, every woman, every peasant and slave, all possessed this divine dignity. In a society where only kings were considered in the image of the gods, this biblical text completely subverted the notion of centralized power. Suddenly, there was no longer a special class with exclusive access to the divine. Every person carried something of the Creator within them. The problem is that over the course of translations into Greek, Latin, and later European languages, this revolutionary idea of equality gradually lost its force. During the European Middle Ages, for instance, who held power? Monarchs and a highly hierarchical church. It's little wonder that many in that context read this verse in a way that reinforced the status quo, perpetuating the belief that certain classes or institutions reflected the image of God more legitimately than others. The implications were vast. Justification for the divine right of kings. If rulers were specially chosen by God, obedience to them became a sacred duty. Strengthening of ecclesiastical power. The church, claiming a privileged connection to the divine image, legitimized its interference in virtually every aspect of social and political life. Social stratification. If some groups were considered more in the image of God than others, inequality and oppression were justified as the natural order of things. It was only over time, particularly during the Protestant Reformation and later the Enlightenment, that some began to reclaim the original essence of this phrase. Reformers like Luther emphasized the universal priesthood of believers, asserting that everyone could approach God without intermediaries. Enlightenment thinkers, in turn, argued for the fundamental equality of all people based on an innate dignity, though often with a less religious perspective. Today, the question remains: do we truly grasp the revolutionary power of Betzelem Elohim? Do we use this concept to affirm the intrinsic dignity of all people? Or do we still see it as elitist or purely symbolic? Perhaps it's time to reclaim the original message, that there is no hierarchy in creation when it comes to bearing the divine image. If this biblical phrase was misunderstood and even weaponized for centuries to justify power structures, imagine what happens when we read it in its truest sense. Every human being, regardless of gender, race, social status, or life history, reflects something of the Creator. It's an idea that can shake hierarchies, stir consciences, and perhaps bring about a much broader understanding of equality and responsibility. After all, if we are all in the image of God, then we are all valuable and equally responsible for how we care for one another. The importance of historical and cultural context. Imagine reading a book written thousands of years ago and trying to understand each word exactly as the original author intended, without knowing the language, customs, or political circumstances of the time. It's an enormous challenge, isn't it? Yet that's precisely what happens when we open the Bible without considering the vast cultural chasm that separates us from the original texts. The three examples we've already explored, Gehenna, Almah, and Betzelem Elohim, illustrate just how radically translations and interpretations can alter not only what we read, but also shape behaviors, doctrines, and even power structures in different societies. For a first-century Jew, hearing the word Gehenna evoked something extremely tangible, a real valley, Jerusalem's rubbish dump, where fire and smoke symbolized purification and destruction. It had nothing to do with an abstract hell of eternal flames, populated by demons tormenting souls. However, when this term was translated into Greek and later Latin, it was replaced with entirely different concepts rooted in mythologies foreign to the biblical culture. The result? A terrifying perpetual image of hell, often used as a tool of fear and religious control. The same logic applies to Almah. In Hebrew, the term describes a young woman of marriageable age. Nothing in it necessarily implies absolute virginity. Yet one translation choice, to Parthenos in Greek, forged an entirely new doctrine, the virgin birth of Jesus. Over time, this version influenced Christian theology, the Church's view of women, and even moral standards regarding sexuality in many communities. Again, the cultural and historical weight of each era infiltrated translations, generating consequences far beyond mere vocabulary. And what about Betzelem Elohim, being created in the image of God? In the context of ancient empires, only kings were seen as the image of the gods. When the Genesis text extended this to all humanity, it delivered an incredibly revolutionary message. Every person, whether slave, peasant, or monarch, bore this divine dignity. Yet over time, certain spiritual or political elites distorted this concept to legitimize hierarchies, claiming that not everyone reflected this image equally. From a profoundly egalitarian principle, we arrived at oppressive systems that endured for centuries. Why did all this happen? A critical factor is that the Bible was written in a world radically different from ours, full of vanished empires, ancient worldviews, and cultural practices that don't make sense today if taken at face value. With each new translation attempting to update the text for its own culture and era, something is lost or transformed. Words gain new meanings, passages are recontextualized, and in some cases, are even censored to align with established doctrines and interests. The consequences. Number 1. Narrative of hell. The idea of an eternal hell solidified as a dreaded dogma, leaving behind the original concept of Gehenna as a symbol of destruction and purification. Number 2. Mary's virginity. The emphasis on absolute virginity shaped theology and profoundly influenced how Christianity relates to sexuality and the role of women. Number 3. Image of God. Rather than a call to equality, the divine image was historically used to justify power structures and unjust hierarchies. The good news is that today, thanks to archaeology, technology, and access to ancient manuscripts, we can revisit these texts to uncover nuances that have been obscured over the centuries. We no longer need to accept dubious translations without question. We can compare versions, consult the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and above all, delve into historical records that better explain each context. What's the next step? It's recognizing that understanding the Bible isn't just about reading the words printed in our preferred version. It requires going deeper, engaging with scholars, examining historical and cultural backgrounds, and, most importantly, keeping an open mind. After all, the richness of these texts lies in their complexity, and how, when understood in depth, they can lead to a more authentic and vibrant faith. The great challenge is this: are we willing to revisit our convictions to align more closely with the original message? Or would we rather cling to established beliefs, even if they stem from questionable translations or distorted interpretations? Either way, acknowledging the importance of historical and cultural context frees us to see the Bible as it truly is, a testament of faith across generations, not a static or infallible manual, but a constant invitation to reimagine the sacred in the light of love and truth. Reflection: the role of truth in faith. We've reached a crucial point in our journey. Truth. There's a persistent myth that uncovering flaws or errors in biblical translations weakens people's faith. But the reality is quite the opposite. When we gain a clearer understanding of what was truly conveyed in the original texts, our faith rests on a much firmer foundation. After all, believing in something with conviction doesn't mean turning a blind eye to research and honest inquiry. It means having the courage to dig deeper. What difference does this make in our practical lives? Consider each example we've explored. A hell that was originally nothing more than a literal valley became an image of unending terror. A term that meant young woman transformed into the doctrine of a perpetually holy virgin, shaping the Christian view of sexual purity. The idea of being made in the image of God shifted from a call to equality to a justification for unjust power structures. These distortions aren't just academic curiosities. They profoundly influence how we live and understand our faith. When we recognize that every word in the Bible was written within a specific historical and cultural context, we realize the original message might be far more liberating than the interpretation we've inherited. And that shouldn't scare us. It should inspire us. Christian faith, after all, has always been built on the sincere pursuit of truth. The early believers debated passionately about what was essential. The Reformers questioned translations and traditions, and even today, voices rise to say, it's time to reconsider what we think is written. Not to dismantle our beliefs, but to bring them closer to who God truly is. A common fear: losing your ground. You might wonder, if I start questioning these translations, won't I lose my footing? Remember, Truth doesn't destroy foundations, it rebuilds them stronger. Authentic faith doesn't fear questions because honesty before God is a fundamental part of our relationship with Him. How to begin this journey of rediscovery? Research. Thanks to the internet and new technologies, anyone can access academic studies, biblical language dictionaries, and historical commentaries. Dialogue. Join groups or communities that discuss the origins of the sacred text without prejudice. Question. A good Christian or believer of any tradition isn't one who blindly swallows everything, but one who grows in understanding of their faith. Share. Don't keep your discoveries to yourself. Sharing what you've learned can help others break barriers and find a more consistent faith, a more profound message. Ultimately, understanding the original context brings us closer to a biblical message that remains alive even after centuries of translations, interpretations, and revisions. It reminds us that behind every verse lies a rich historical reality. And behind every historical reality, a God who communicates in a perfectly contextualized way. Rediscovering these contexts doesn't weaken the power of Scripture. On the contrary, it reveals a God far greater than our limited interpretations and a gospel far more liberating than we could imagine. So, if something doesn't seem to fit, if questions bubble up in your mind, and if curiosity drives you to investigate, don't be afraid. This might just be the beginning of a journey where faith, once based on traditions that don't always reflect the original text, shifts to rest on solid and transformative knowledge. After all, as it has been said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Conclusion. We've reached the end of a journey that has taken us through real valleys turned into metaphorical hells, Hebrew words transformed into doctrines, and expressions that should have proclaimed equality, but instead became foundations for historical inequalities. Each example we explored, Gehenna, Almah, and Betzelem Elohim, reveals that translation is far more than a simple choice of synonyms. It is a process shaped by cultural, political, and religious disputes, and at times, even personal interests. Understanding how these texts were shaped highlights the importance of a faith grounded in solid knowledge and intellectual humility. The pursuit of truth does not endanger our spirituality. Rather, it can free us from distorted views that, however unintended, tarnish the essence of the gospel. Revisiting Hebrew and Greek, studying the context of the ancient Near East, and delving into historical records do not diminish the divine presence in the Bible. They simply allow us to see it more clearly. Revisiting Hebrew and Greek, studying the context of the ancient Near East, and delving into historical records do not diminish the divine presence in the Bible. They simply allow us to see it more clearly. Looking back, it may feel unsettling to realize that so many generations have embraced beliefs rooted in flawed translations or manipulated intentions. Yet, there is something beautiful, even hopeful, in this awakening. After all, if the Word of God is alive, it is not confined to words etched in a dead language. It continuously invites us to reflect, question, and deepen our understanding. And if we discover in some passages that it wasn't quite as we thought, this can open doors to a renewed faith, one built on honesty rather than a fear of re-examining what we've been taught. This process also invites each of us to step out of the role of passive spectators. Instead of merely consuming what is neatly packaged for us, we are encouraged to study, compare translations, understand the context of each verse, and above all, engage in open dialogue with others, whether they are scholars, spiritual leaders, or ordinary individuals who also seek to grow in faith. On this journey, we need not fear differences of opinion. They may, in fact, be the very engine that propels us towards a deeper encounter with the divine. When we approach the Scriptures as something alive in constant dialogue with the world, we learn to value them not for the immutable interpretations once imposed on us, but for their power to illuminate the path of every generation. Ultimately, the lesson is one of courage. Courage to face the possibility that much of what we believe may have been inherited without question. Courage to acknowledge that the Bible is richer than the limitations of translation allow us to see. And above all, courage to live a faith that does not rely on myths or distortions to stand firm, but on a heart willing to know more and more the truth that the author of the sacred texts continues to reveal.